What is up, everybody? Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. I'm also the 2018 Innovation Award winner from the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Like to say, as always, you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And I'd like to thank the people that are in the room on Get Vocal, Stephen Badges and Latina NYC. Thank you so much for joining in. And as always, if you want to jump in, there are seats open. And lots of crazy things going on. So I'm going to let that phone ring because the focus is on this gentleman right here. Now, most of the time I say to people, I like to bring new friends onto the platform, but this gentleman is not a new friend. And I'm going to pop quiz him. Does he remember the first time, what year he came on the Dr. Vibe Show?
I do not, actually. I was just thinking about that as you were speaking. It's been a long time.
It has been a while. Well, you were first on around December 2013.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. We were both kind of getting started.
Yes, December 2013, we first encountered each other, and it has been a worthwhile journey, especially when we are on together and him sharing. This is who we have on today. Coach Michael Taylor is an entrepreneur. He's an author of 7 books. He's a motivational speaker, radio show host who has dedicated his life to empowering men and women to reach their full potential. He knows firsthand how to overcome adversity and build a rewarding, fulfilling life, and he is sharing his knowledge and wisdom with others to support them in creating the life of their dreams. He's no stranger to adversity and challenges. He was born in the inner city projects of Corpus Christi, Texas, to a single mother with 6 children. Although he dropped out of high school in the 11th grade, his commitment to living an extraordinary life supported him in defying the odds. There's a lot of things. I'll highlight some other things too. Bankrupt and alone, he committed to rebuilding his life, which propelled him to begin a 25-year inner journey of professional transformation, which resulted in him discovering his true self and his passions for living. As a result, he's now happily married for over 17 years and living his dream of living an extraordinary life while being in service to others. Through his books, lectures, and radio program, he now coaches others on how to become genuinely happy with their lives and live the lives they were born to live. He is going to be sharing with us a little bit about his past, because I know a lot of people here have not met Michael before. But the main thrust of our conversation tonight is he's written a new book called A New Conversation Can Lead to a New Culture of Manhood. What a non-interesting subject. So welcome back to the Dr. Vibe Show, home of Epic Conversations. Coach Michael Taylor, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. And just to kind of clarify, this book was actually written a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
I've actually written 4 books since this one.
Okay.
So my primary focus has always been men's work and men's issues, and most of my books are targeted to men. But with all the negativity we're seeing in the media right now, with the Me Too movements and the sexual assaults and so forth, I think it's an important conversation to have. So it's a timeless conversation, regardless of when the book came out.
Absolutely. It's actually probably more relevant today than when you wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, for most of the people here, they don't know anything about you other than what I just read. Can you share a little bit of background about yourself outside of the wonderful bio that I read of you?
Well, I consider myself to be an irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. And I don't buy into mainstream media that portrays this idea that, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be alive on the planet than right now. And what I have done is simply taken the lessons that I've learned over the last 20, 25 years to spread my optimism with others. Because I think what we need now more than ever is optimism. And like I said, there are obviously a lot of challenges in the world today. But when we make a commitment to our own inner transformation, then we become tools that the universe can use to actually make the world a better place. And that's what I try to do. Make the world a little bit better place by sharing my wisdom.
Excellent. I do want to highlight the experiences of growing up when you were younger, especially, being raised by a single mother, and she had 6 children. How was that? And what did you learn and have you learned from your mother based on that experience?
Well, we were basically the poster children for poverty back in the 60s. And we were in inner city projects and, food stamps, government assistance, government housing, and all of that. But despite the lack of funds, if you will, my mother instilled in me at a very early age that anything was possible. And one of the things she taught me was, she says, if you want something badly enough, no one can keep you from accomplishing it except yourself. So at a very early age, I had this deep sense of responsibility that I was responsible for my life turning out the way that I wanted it to. It didn't matter what my race was. It didn't matter, what people were saying. If I wanted something badly enough, I could have it. And so it was that attitude that allowed me to, despite being a high school dropout, climb the corporate ladder for this building supply center and become the youngest manager in the history of that company, and one of only 2 Black managers out of about 87. And so, I'm 23 years old. I'm living the American dream, and by society standards, I'm pretty successful. And there was this drive in me. I've always known that I was destined to do amazing things. And I was, again, doing the corporate thing and living by society's rules. But it wasn't until I went through my divorce, my bankruptcy, and foreclosure that I received what I'll call my wake-up call. The wake-up call was, you're not doing what you were put on the planet to do. And so what I know is the lessons that I learned from being born poor is what drives me. Because I knew that I was capable of living an extraordinary life. And my mom, when I was really small, she used to let me read and show me magazines of successful people, wealthy people. She says, this is what you're shooting for. This is your goal. You can do this. And again, I just believe that at a very early age. And that's what has allowed me to far exceed what society says a young man of color with a limited education should be able to accomplish.
Excellent. I just want to shout out from Philadelphia, Flood the drummer, longtime supporter of the Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations. Thanks, Flood, for joining on via Periscope. Appreciate it, not taken for granted. When did you make the full-fledged jump into entrepreneurship? What were the circumstances and why did you make the decision when you did?
Well, actually, I started my first company when I was 14 years old. I was walking to school one day and I passed by this motorcycle shop, and I happened to overhear a conversation between these 2 men, and they were actually arguing. And what it was the owner was arguing with his mechanic because the mechanic didn't want to sweep the floors. And when I overheard the conversation, I walked into the motorcycle shop and I looked at the guy and said, hey, look, I kind of overheard your conversation and I have a solution to your problem. I'm willing to clean your garage. And the guy kind of smiled, probably 60, 65-year-old gray-haired guy, just really cool. But he was really impressed that here's this young kid walking in saying that I'm ready to go to work. And so he asked me, okay, how much are you going to charge me to clean my garage? I said, I'll tell you what, let me clean your garage first, and then you decide what you want to pay me. And that really impressed him. So I came back after school, cleaned this garage. It was immaculate. I mean, it was just amazing. And he said, wow. He says, okay, so what are you going to charge? Well, at the time, minimum wage was $1.40 an hour. Now,
can you repeat that?
$1.40 an hour. That was minimum wage. So he offers to pay me $5 an hour. Now, I'm only working 2 hours a day after school, but think about it. I'm 14 years old, walking down the street, get a job, $5 an hour. I thought I was doing pretty good. Well, it turns out that he had 3 other friends that had garages. So guess who was cleaning their garage? So all of a sudden I had basically a janitorial business without even knowing what that was, but I was making money at 14. And so as I got older, got to high school, one of the things that I loved is I love electronics. And so I learned how to install car stereos. I made a ton of money in high school installing car stereos. That was just something that I loved to do. And then another passion that I had in high school was I was a DJ. I had my own equipment. I drug my albums around, and I had my big reel-to-reel player, and did parties and dances and clubs, and it was a blast. And so I've been an entrepreneur since I was 14 years old.
I love that reel to reel player. Love
You
it.
remember those? You remember those, don't
Well,
you?
hey, well, let's put it this way. My dad still has one. It's in his man cave with all his vinyl and all that. He has a reel to reel, and I can quote them all. It's a Sony TC377.
I had a TX.
Oh wow, TIAC. Wow. Yeah, TIAC and Sony were the sort of the leaders of the game back in the day when it came to reel to reel. I wonder if we took a reel to reel tape and gave it to someone that was 12 years old and asked them what that is, and I'd love to see their face.
Absolutely. But see, they missed the beauty of creating a playlist on a reel to reel player.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what are some of the different ventures that you were in entrepreneurial wise before what you're doing now?
Well, I was managing a company called McCoy's Building Supply. Okay. So it was a building supply center. And even as a manager, I was starting these little side businesses. And back in the 80s, I don't know if you remember, but they deregulated telephones, payphones. So a company could actually buy their own payphones and put it in their business and not have to go through Southwestern Bell. Well, a lot of people were buying these payphones, and they had these really ugly payphone cases that the phones went in. And so I thought to myself, I said, what would happen if somebody created custom booths for phones? So again, my background in woodworking and so forth, I came up with a couple of really creative ideas, some that were really stained with exotic woods, and some that were Formica, Formica, the laminate surface. So basically I created a little portfolio, and I'd go to these companies. I said, look, I understand that, you have your own payphone. I'd like to design a custom booth for your business. And so I had a little phone booth business on the side. I also created a company back in the 80s where, before video cameras were really, really popular, and when they were really, really expensive, I bought this camcorder. And what I would do is I would go to real estate companies and I would record and videotape going into the neighborhood, the houses that they were trying to sell, to do listings. And I actually created a little company doing videos of homes for real estate. So that's just a couple of the ventures that I started even while I was managing that building supply center.
Just want to shout out one of the faithful and loyal supporters of the Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations, Claude Diamond, who's on Periscope. Welcome, Claude. And Claude is actually going to be coming on the Dr. Vibe Show in the next few weeks. I believe I have it the 25th of this month. And so check him out. Claude is a master salesperson. His main focus is the real estate field, but his guts sales method works in so many different areas, whether you're in real estate or non-real estate. That is, it works. So definitely take a look and follow me on Get Vocal or on Twitter, and you'll get ready for that epic conversation that's coming up. How did you get into coaching, Michael?
Well, as mentioned, I went through, the divorce, bankruptcy, and all of that. And it actually began, I was during the darkest period of my life. Again, I had been bankrupt, foreclosure. Actually, I was homeless for 2 years, living out of a car. And during the darkest period of my life, I was sitting up late one night, and I was sitting at the edge of my bed, and I was looking across the room at my bookshelf. And I noticed that every book on my bookshelf had something to do with making money or getting rich. And as I looked at those books, this question just popped in my head. And the question was this: Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? That question literally changed my life in an instant. Something in me shifted. All of a sudden, my depression lifted. And I had this clarity. I could see and sense that I was going to be able to rebuild my life. And then I stopped reading books on getting rich and making money. And I started reading books on psychology and philosophy and spirituality and metaphysics. And I just went on this amazing journey of personal growth and transformation. And so after rebuilding my life, putting all the pieces back together and climbing out of the hole I was in, I decided that I wanted to share the lessons that I learned with others. And I began writing. I actually wrote my first book back in 1994, which was targeted specifically to men of color. It was called Brothers, Are You Listening? A Success Guide for the New Millennium. And in that book, I talked about things like, cultural conditioning. I talked about things like personal growth and development. I talked about the importance of being in touch with your emotions and relationships and spirituality. And it was an interesting journey, if you will, because my intention was to empower men of color. And the primary reason I wrote the book was because I was in a restaurant one evening and I happened to overhear a conversation between these two men of color. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most depressing, heartbreaking conversations I'd ever heard. These guys were talking about the eradication of Black men from society. And so I walked over to their table. I apologized for eavesdropping. And I asked the guy, I said, man, please tell me that you don't believe what you just said. And one of the guys looked at me, and I'll never forget his face. And I'll never forget the feeling that I got, because it was this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And he looked at me and he says, man, absolutely, I believe that. He says, don't you watch the news? He said, I believe in 20 years, all Black men are either going to be dead or in jail. And it broke my heart. And I knew there was nothing I could have said that would have really changed his mind. So I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, don't believe the hype. And I walked away. But as I was walking away, there was a part of me that said, I have to do something. I don't know what, but I have to do something. I have to do something to change the mindset of men of color. And that's what triggered me to write the book, Brothers, Are You Listening? And so from there, I continued my own growth journey. And I've been doing workshops and seminars and reading literally hundreds of books. And I've simply taken all the lessons that I learned once again and share it. And I understand, or I came to the awareness that I have this amazing gift, because it is a gift. Writing is a gift. And it is this gift that I've been given, that I know that it is my responsibility to share that gift with others. And I do that through writing. And so that's kind of how I got into this whole personal growth and development process.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing this. Again, another shout out on the Periscope end, Sean Osby. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching the epic conversation. So, Michael, let's turn your mind back when you were writing this book. Two-part conversation piece. Why did you write it, and what caused you to write it when you did write it a few years ago?
Well, but this particular book, A New Conversation with Ben, was a continuation of my writing, because initially I was targeting men of color because there's very few men of color that are writing these types of books. But what I know is when we start talking about masculinity, it has nothing to do with race or ethnicity. Masculinity is about not just manhood, but about this whole cultural paradigm that we've created that I think is antiquated and no longer working, because so many men are trapped in this antiquated belief system about what it means to be a man, that they don't recognize that the roles of manhood and masculinity are changing rapidly for the better. But a lot of men are confused and don't fully understand and see it as something that's good, because a lot of people don't realize here in America, for the first time in this country's history, there are actually more women in the workforce than men. For the first time in this country's history, there's more women graduating from college than men. If you look at our current presidential upcoming race, you see the amount of women that are running for president. So there's a lot of changes that are occurring that some men feel threatened, because most men don't like to change. But I see it as a very positive thing. And so what I do is I coach men in recognizing that the roles of masculinity are changing for the better, and there's a better way to live, because most of us as men, we get trapped in what I'll call this antiquated paradigm. And so what this book does is it brings awareness to men about some of the illusions that we get trapped in. And we'll talk about those illusions, I'm sure, because what I discovered over this last 20, 25 years is there are 5 illusions of manhood that cause most of the pain and suffering in a man's life. Men get trapped in these illusions and then they don't understand why their life isn't working. Well, I'll say because they're trapped in one of these illusions. And then I also discovered that there are what I call 5 masks of masculinity. And these are the masks that men hide behind, and unconscious in most cases. But when a man wakes up and understands that he's trapped in these illusions, then he can change them. And also when he does that, he can start removing his mask and be authentic. And that's what I coach men on doing.
In regards to this topic, how much of an impact on how a man was raised has on this subject?
Well, again, if we look collectively, and when I say collectively, I'm talking hundreds of years of male indoctrination. And as a matter of fact, in the book, I talk about what I believe are the 5 stages of evolution for men. And here are the 5 stages of evolution. First stage is what's called the caveman stage. Second stage is called the warrior stage. Third stage is called the religious male stage. Fourth stage is called the scientific male stage. And the 5th stage, which is what I think we're evolving to, is what I call the authentic male stage. So if you look throughout history, if you think about it from the very beginning, as cavemen, we had 2 responsibilities, basically: provide and protect. Okay. And I'll also throw in the other P, which is procreate. Okay. So those are the 3 responsibilities that cavemen had. They didn't really have language. They just knew instinctively that that's what they were supposed to do. Well, because of the divine intelligence that created the universe and this evolutionary process, then the next stage of evolution is what's called the warrior male. The warrior male is once human beings gained language and they started moving across the continent, then anybody that didn't look like them, they thought were a threat. So they would fight and kill and tear up the countryside or wherever they were. And so that was part of that paradigm back then. But once again, the universal intelligence that created the universe said, okay, so we need to change that. So what happens? Well, all of a sudden, we started getting these spiritual leaders that started showing up. That started saying, there's a different way to be. We don't have to kill each other because we're different. And so we had, spiritual figures like Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and all these people that start telling men that there's a different way to live. So that was what's called the religious male. Then we evolved continuously. And we started moving technologically because we started creating things like the printing press and then, of course, all the different technologies. So we evolved and we started understanding how weather did this. And so we thought that, maybe God was mad at us and that's why lightning came. Well, with technology, we realized it had nothing to do with God. It's just a weather pattern and how that works. And so we shifted to this scientific, in our minds, thinking, rationalizing, intellectualizing everything, which is good. But all of a sudden, I think men are starting to say, well, there's got to be more. And I think that something more that men are hungry for is what I call the authentic male. And this is the man who takes the time to fully understand who he is. He's willing to look deep within his own heart and mind to understand that he's a human being and he can overcome and transform any challenge that he may be faced with. But he understands that it's not just about providing, protecting, and procreating. It's about connecting. And I think what men are really hungry for more than anything is connection. And yet most of us don't know how to get that. And that's what my work is about, supporting men in connecting. So a new conversation with men is just that. It's engaging men in a dialogue about what it means to be a man.
It's interesting. There's a number of things I want to ask you about what you just shared with us. Do you feel that most men are ready to delve into the authentic stage, or do you feel that a lot of men are in confusion because it's a very confusing time in regards to masculinity? There's toxic masculinity, there's manhood. It seems many men that I encounter, there's a state of confusion, and they're not ready for that authenticity yet because they're confused.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would assert that the majority of men aren't ready for this conversation. The majority of men, I heard somebody on TV the other day, I can't remember, it might have been a rapper or an actor, but he said something I thought was kind of hilarious. He says, these men out here talking about men should be in touch with their emotions. And he said that, I call that the pussification of men. And so,
Right.
so there are a lot of men that reject this conversation because they haven't taken the time to really embrace some of these ideas. And once again, we're talking years and years of conditioning. But what I know is when I first started writing back in the 90s, if you went to a bookstore, there were very few books out there targeted specifically to men about this conversation. You go in the bookstore now, there are tons and tons of books.
You know what? It's interesting. I certainly agree that there are more, but I still don't think there's enough that are focusing. I see a lot of articles, but I see definitely more books than a few years ago, but still not enough.
Well, again, you got to remember that the current paradigm, if you will, is very strong. And it's like, imagine a rocket ship that's taking off. Okay. A rocket ship uses some 75% of all of its fuel just to lift off. But once it breaks the atmosphere, it doesn't need that fuel because it's used all that fuel at the beginning. And now it can just kind of float and go where it's going. Well, see, it's that same concept with men. We're burning all this fuel and energy trapped in this old way of being, but men are really struggling to move up. I think they're hungry. They don't have a choice because of evolution. But again, it's still a difficult conversation for men to have. And so, again, when I look at the amount of coaches and I do several podcasts, and the people that are the men out there that are really having these deep types of conversations, organizations like the Mankind Project, which I'm a part of. There's a program called Ever Forward, which is specifically for men of color to get in touch with their feelings. And there's an organization called the Black Man Can Institute, which talks about black men.
Yeah, Brandon Frame.
So there's a lot of organizations now that are having this conversation, but mainstream media still rejects this conversation. Why? Because our media focuses on everything that's wrong. And they'd rather show you a story about a man in domestic violence. They'd rather show you a story about mass shootings and killings. They don't want to show you a story of men coming together, healing their hearts and connecting on an emotional and psychological level. That's not interesting. So again, we have to understand that, and this is, they say that the first step to solving any problem is to admit that you have one. Okay? What most people refuse to admit is that collectively, America as a country loves violence. Period. Loves violence. How do I know that? Look at your results. Look at your television stations. Look at your news media. What do you see on a regular basis? We love violence. I mean, think about even the metaphors we use in society. We say we're having a war on poverty. We're always fighting something. It's just our whole mentality is violence. And so we have to understand that the only way to change that is one human being at a time.
Okay.
One human being at a time. And that's what I'm attempting to do.
Oh, well, you're not attempting, you're doing it. You're doing it. You've been doing it since I've known you. So I still think you're doing it, unless you did a 180 somewhere down the road. I still think you're doing it. With this book, there's so much we could chat about, but I want to focus in regards, and you mentioned earlier on that you probably want to get a little bit deeper into this, is the 5 illusions of manhood.
Yeah.
And I want to, land on that for a little bit of time. So the first illusion that you have is, you've put down here in the book, is to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, we live in a culture and society that has conditioned men to believe that we aren't supposed to feel. We say that women are more emotional than men, which I say is completely false. Men have the exact same feelings, the exact same emotions as women. We feel those emotions at the same depth, the same level. What's different is we live in a culture that allows women to express their emotions. For men, we're okay with expressing things like anger, but how many men are comfortable talking about their sadness or their fear? We bottle that up. We don't talk about those things. We wonder why we have such high rates of addiction and violence is because men have not been given a space to release and let go of emotional pain. Because emotional pain will cause a man to do irrational things. If you aren't in touch with how you feel and your emotions, you'll act out of that emotional pain. And we don't like talking about that, but that's the reality. And so men, we've been taught that, once again, big boys don't cry, be tough, man up. And so what happens is we start repressing and suppressing our emotions. And those suppressed emotions causes dis-ease, disease on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, simply because we haven't been given an opportunity to be authentic in sharing how we feel. And so a man has to be courageous enough to feel and express. And the only way to do that is to create an environment where a man feels safe enough to share. And that's the challenge, creating a container in which a man can be real and authentic. And that's a challenge.
Before we go further, just want to shout out my fellow Canuck, Ryan from Alberta. He is in the room. Welcome, as always, Ryan, and hope you and your son are doing fine. I just want to ask about that in regards to men creating this space. Some people say, well, why can't they create this space? What's blocking them from creating this space?
It's the current paradigm of masculinity. The current paradigm of masculinity is so invasive. It's so pervasive in our society that we don't even realize we're trapped in it. Because again, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of years of male indoctrination into a culture that says we aren't supposed to do certain things. And this whole idea about emotional connection and awareness and expressing how you feel, men go, no, we don't want to talk about that because it's uncomfortable. And yet, the more we talk about these things, the more we open the door for transformation and change. But again, it takes courageous men to lead, to say, hey, look, I'm willing to talk about these things. And when you do, when someone takes that first step, then men start to follow. And that's kind of what's happening with the men's movement. See, the men's movement actually started way back in the 80s. Robert Bly and Iron John and Sam Keane and Fire in the Belly. And we started having this conversation back in the 80s. And I personally believe it's picking up steam because we don't have a choice. And so when you look at the situations that we're seeing throughout our media with, once again, the sexual assaults and the Me Too movements, that's part of this awakening, I call it, because most people see it as a negative. Did you see the Gillette ad about toxic masculinity?
Oh, yeah. Actually, in one of my parenting courses for fathers, we just showed that on Tuesday night.
And it's amazing how many men were so upset about that commercial because the implication was they were saying that all men are toxic. And that's not what the commercial was about. The commercial was really about men taking responsibility for their actions. And so I personally don't believe there's such a thing as toxic masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic. There are some men that commit toxic acts, toxic behaviors, but masculinity in and of itself is not toxic. But once again, we live in a media, in a culture that took that word, attached it to this whole Me Too movement, and all of a sudden it's like men are the bad guys. We're all toxic. We're all, we're out here abusing women and all of that. But the fact is, there's no such thing, in my judgment, of no such thing as toxic masculinity.
Interesting. One of my mentors, a gentleman named Glenn Barker, who runs the Mankind Project's outlet in Chicago, he says that boys make excuses, men take responsibility.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really true in what you're saying. And we have a friend coming on. Mr. Ryan, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Ryan is a great content creator, live stream wise, and thanks for stopping in, Ryan. Anything? I know you have some comments to make, so do share with Michael and myself.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, it's a great topic, because I think even as a black male, and there's so many layers and barriers to even being a black male, and then add the society's view of what a male is. I find it very hard to navigate, because you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. But one thing that I learned, I had the pleasure of, I'm not part of the lodge anymore, but I became a third degree Master Mason with the Prince Hall Lodge. And we're no longer operating because we just didn't have enough members to operate. But you learn through brotherhood how to be a man. Like, you learn through the principles of like ancient teachings of how to stand upright, and it has nothing to do with beating your chest and hollering at a girl and say, "Hey, what's up, baby?" and all this stuff. There are ways of conducting one's life that is in harmony to everybody else's. I think like what brings true masculinity is when a man can really organize his thoughts in such a way that he can build things, that he can bring things together, not tearing people apart and not breaking down a woman, for example. I can't really get into it deeper, but it's just, some of the principles of Freemasonry just help people kind of see. Because I'll use an example. Like, look at the London Bridge, or look at the pyramids. It took so much mastery to create such monuments. And it takes a certain mind to be able to create something like that. And if once you educate yourself and learn the principles of brotherhood, it changes your whole life. And that's what it had a profound effect on me. I don't know. I'm sorry for alluding to certain things. I'm not really being specific, but I just wanted to add that comment.
Michael, what would you like to add on to what Ryan has shared with us?
Well, for centuries, there's been organizations that taught us, if you will, how to be men. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being a part of, and I think that's an extremely important part of being a man, is having a community in which you are supported and nurtured, and you can be who you are, that type of thing. But I think what's been missing is most of these organizations taught us how to think, not how to feel. And I think what's missing is men being willing to feel, because the true essence of who we are, our emotions are just energy in motion. And when we can't identify those emotions, then we will struggle because we act out of emotions, whether we're conscious of it or not. For example, we see a lot of violence, and the first thing we think is that violence is always the result of anger. Well, I will assert that a lot of times it's not anger at all. Anger is the only way they know how to express their emotions, period. So a lot of times what they're feeling is really sadness, deep sadness, but they don't have an outlet to talk about how they feel sad. So what do? They lash out in anger and violence. If you taught them how to get in touch with the sadness and be okay with that, they wouldn't have to act out in anger. So once again, our culture in most male organizations focus on our minds and our intellects and what we think. But an authentic man gets deeper. An authentic man goes to his heart. He takes that long journey from his head to his heart, and he's able to understand and to act appropriately when he feels a certain emotion. And so that's, again, I think where we're headed. Men are ready to go a little deeper, get out of their heads, get into their hearts, because you cannot be relational if you're unwilling to be emotional. And as men, too many times in relationships, we do relationships from here, not here.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Can I clarify my previous comment?
Sure.
In masonry, they teach you that 90% of your of Freemasonry is brotherhood, and 10% is the intellect. And brotherhood plays a big role because you need to be able to trust people to be emotional, right? Sure. What's being emotional when you cannot express yourself and learn how to work with your fellow man? I think that in a lot of these organizations, as you say, they teach you how to have compassion. They teach you how to be charitable and how to become a humanitarian. So you are not just thinking about yourself and helping yourself become upright, but you're also, once you become upright in your intellect, that you can now lend your experience in helping other people. So, and I totally agree with what you're saying. I just thought I would clarify that brotherhood is the most important part. And I think that we need to be able to, to discuss when we have a problem and be able to have unconditional love from our friends and our family in order for us to feel safe, secure, and feel grounded, right? Because I'll say this too. I was a youth, a troubled youth at risk when I was younger. And my mentor, he came into my life and he helped me express myself through martial arts and music, and he used to help the gangs in Chicago. And he was like, he went and learned first he got beat up by gangs in Chicago, went to martial arts, and then came back and cleaned up his community and used the same principles to help shape my life. And again, it was all about just expression. It's just being able to rely on a group of brothers or sisters or whomever, but, just getting that aggression out and expressing yourself, because a lot of even cancer is part of the cause of cancer in some people is just repressed emotions. It's not healthy to carry around a lot of that baggage. So I thought I would clarify that, but this is a great show. I didn't want to take over. I'm going to get at it.
No, you're helping making it up a conversation. So no worries at all. And certainly if you want to stay in and continue with the conversation, no problem at all. He's jumped back out. No problem. I have a feeling he'll jump back in. I have a feeling we may have to do a part 2 of this one. So because I think we're only going to probably get through 2 of these, and we just finished the first one. So we'll see how it goes, because if we want to get through all 5 of them, it's going to be a long conversation. So we'll see where we go. The next one up here is, to be a man, you must have money and material possessions. That's the next illusion out of your 5.
Well, actually, let's jump to another illusion, which I think is more important, which is,
okay,
to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. Okay, so that's one that we really need to have a conversation about, because that is something that drives so many men's behavior, because we think that we're validating who we are as men by sleeping with as many women as possible. We live in a society and culture that promotes this idea that sex sells. And so we're constantly bombarded with all these images about sex. A lot of times what happens, the reason a man is acting out sexually is because he hasn't dealt with his emotions. He hasn't dealt with his feelings. And so what he's doing, he's trying to validate himself through this sexual act based on a sense of inadequacy and trying to feel good about himself. And so when we as men connect with who we are, get in touch with our emotions, make a distinction between having sex and making love, which some men can't make that distinction, then we can eradicate this whole idea that men validate themselves through sexual conquest. And it begins with men being willing to be honest with how they feel.
Makes perfect sense. I want to just go back to what we were discussing before when Ryan was joining in. And for a number of men, the easiest emotions are quitting and anger. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Because in our society and culture, we hear and we'll say, oh, he's just being a man. He's just being a man. And we accept that. And most men are much more comfortable expressing the feeling of anger because it's not as vulnerable than expressing fear or sadness. And a lot of men can't connect to joy.
Why do you feel that?
Because if you look at, and I really, this really comes across on a conversation I had with my son. This is a perfect example. My son, my oldest son, who's now 38, by the way, when he was in high school, I remember he took a picture with his football team and he had this really serious look on his face. And I said, Charles, why weren't you smiling? Oh, Dad, man, I can't be a punk. He said, I can't be a punk. I can't be smiling. And I said, son, what do you mean you're going to be a punk because you smile? He says, yeah, man. I can't. And if you looked at the picture, all of the football players had this really serious, aggressive looking face. Well, see, that's the microcosm of our society. Men are taught to be hard and tough and to not show emotion. And so to surrender to joy and to express joy makes a lot of men uncomfortable. I did a speech once, and this guy came up to me and he told me, he said, you know what? I don't trust you. I said, why don't you trust me? He said, my daddy told me never trust a man who smiles all the time.
Interesting.
And he was serious. He was very serious. And I said, so you think a man that smiles all the time can't be trustworthy? He said, that's what my daddy said. Once again, our culture has conditioned men not to be expressive emotionally. And to be expressive, we just need to be in touch with all the energies that are in us and be able to share them authentically.
How is this illusion grown as a bigger challenge more today than when you wrote this book originally?
I think so. And I think part of the reason is because of the access to pornography websites and this whole idea, these, people are exposed to all this sexual content without any education about the emotional ramifications of being in an intimate relationship with a woman or a man if you're gay. So again, I think what's happening is we're reaching that critical mass where collectively as a humanity that we're saying enough is enough. And it's time to create these loving, intimate, connected relationships. And I think that's probably the most important conversation we aren't having in mainstream media, which is the only way to create those types of relationships is to be emotional. I can't hear you.
Sorry. What type of conversations should we or should be having in families or elders having with young boys?
Well, again, because of my work in men's groups, I think the most powerful resource a man can have is a group of men that have done some of their inner work. and to be put in an environment. As a matter of fact, I wrote a whole book called Lessons from a Gathering of Men. And I talk about the power of men's group in healing and growing and transformation. And so when we look at, there's the word we use is container. A container is an environment in which a man feels comfortable and safe enough that he's willing to speak from his heart. And a lot of men aren't comfortable with that. Most men, I would say, aren't comfortable with that. But in that space, if a man is truly committed, he can grow in leaps and bounds when he has the support of a community of men that are willing to see him without judgment, without condemnation, or he can just be who he is and express whatever is there for him. And those types of containers are all over the place. There's tons and tons of men's groups around. But once again, the majority of men are very uncomfortable participating. Because here's what I know. As a human being, there's only two things that will cause a person to want to change. The first one is pain, and the second one is what I call divine discontent. It is that inner feeling that something is just not right, and we may not have the words to express it or to explain it, but we just know something's off. Now, for men, most of us wait until we're in so much pain, we don't have a choice. It's either get help or die.
True.
So what we have to be willing to do is make it safe enough for men to understand that the three most difficult words for any man to say is, I need help. The three most difficult words.
How do we create, and I always hear the safe spaces, etc. How can we create more safe spaces for men so they can become authentic to themselves, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, you have to have men that have done the work. You have to have men who have done the work, gone through the process of dealing with their stuff, and then are willing to share with other people. Because once a man does this work and really connects with his heart, it is my belief that all human beings are actually connected. The only thing we believe and we think we're separate based on an ethnocentric worldview, meaning we think we're different and separate based on ethnicity, race, and all these illusions that we create that we're somehow different. The truth is we're all the same. We're all actually connected. And we're connected through this. If we're willing to get out of our heads, out of our minds, and connect to our hearts, that's where true intimacy and connection comes from. And so having conversations like this is what opens the door for men to say, I really resonate with that. Maybe it's time for me to try something different. For example, there's such a negative stigma about men in therapy. It's like, oh no, that's a no-no. But see, every man should be courageous enough that if he needs help, he should be willing to say, I need help. And the way to support men in doing that is for men like myself who are willing to say, it's okay to say you need help. And so that's why I write. That's why I speak. That's why I do shows like this, because I'm sharing a message of it's okay to say I'm not okay.
Just want to touch base here on the Periscope side. Shout out to Jason Hodge. He is very much enjoying what you're sharing. Michael, what else? I got U4 Sight that is also here. And I got a number of different comments, just trying to decipher here, but it's no problem. No problem. We got all this. Yeah, he says we start these myths like men can't talk to men. Men can't cry, and a whole lot of these artificial myths. That's what U4 Sight is saying, and I think they're still a little bit around, but I'm hearing them less and less now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
which is a good thing.
Another way to look at it, once again, is he used the word myths, But I like the word illusions, because an illusion is something that appears real, but it really isn't. And so we get trapped in these illusions. And so it is our responsibility to wake up from those illusions.
Well, it's interesting here because on Periscope here, Jason Hodge is saying men talk to men all the time, and I hear that. But what they're talking about really important things? Like men talk a lot of crap to each other.
They talk about
right.
They talk about sports. They talk about making money. They talk about chasing women. They talk about politics. But do they talk about their emotional pain? Do they talk about the challenges and the struggles they have in their relationships? That's a different conversation.
It's interesting. And Forsyth says, but we do talk about our problems so that we can work them out without judging. Which is interesting. Very, very interesting. So the men that are on here saying they do talk it out, which is good. I think talking out is important, and also hugging it out is important also. Mm-hmm. Just a thought. Go ahead. And you were going to say something?
Yeah, and again, we have this idea, and we live in such a homophobic society. A lot of men aren't comfortable embracing and hugging another man, creating true intimacy and connection with another man because of the fear of being labeled gay. But see, as human beings, we need intimate touch. We need connection. We need embracing. We need hugs. It's part of the human conditioning. And so the question becomes, how many men are courageous enough to be comfortable enough to fully embrace another man? A lot of men struggle with that.
Well, I don't, especially with men that I'm close with. And when I see them, I hug them first, because after they leave, I don't know what's going to happen to them. And sure, life can happen. And for a lot of times, hugging a man lets him let the air out of himself, because there's so much going on inside that he knows that someone's somewhat got his back.
Oh yeah. But see, again, in some of my workshops, I'll have an exercise where I just ask men just to embrace each other and then express how they felt in a simple exercise of just hugging another man. And it's amazing how rigid and uncomfortable it makes men. Now, I understand if you're hugging somebody that you don't know, sure, there can be some discomfort there. But for the most part, when you're in the environment that I've created, you should be comfortable. And so to get men to, at the beginning of the workshop, be afraid to hug each other, but by the end of the workshop, they're hugging each other and embracing each other, because we've created a space that allows them to know that it's okay. And that's what's important, creating that space, that environment where men get the sense that they can be authentic and connect with each other without judgment, without being accused of being gay or whatever. So it's about creating that space where men get real.
Yeah, interesting. The Periscope comments are flying here. The Jason Hodge is saying, when you have gotten to the point where you own your identity, you can connect like that. And also to you, Forsyth is saying, he could never be another man's father, but he can give a man direction.
Sure.
Gentlemen, keep the comments flowing. Excellent stuff, especially going on Periscope tonight. Do you want to highlight another one of the illusions, and then we'll probably start winding down, because we could go on forever.
Absolutely.
But we want people to buy the book. At the end of the day, we want people to buy the book. So certainly, if you want to highlight on another illusion,
yeah, let's do the last illusion, which is, to be a man, you must constantly compete with and try to outdo other men. And this is an unwritten rule that men have. We've all heard the term keeping up with the Joneses. So we're constantly competing with each other, trying to outdo each other. And I say it's time for men to stop competing and to start connecting, to understand that, number one, there's enough for everybody. But most importantly, don't try to impress me with your stuff. I want to know you. I want to connect with you. So don't come to me and say, I just spent $10,000 on a watch, or I just bought my, $100,000 car. I could care less. I want to know what makes your heart sing. I want to know what brings you joy. I want to know, can you stand with me when my heart is hurting? Can you truly be there for me if I really need you? See, those are the types of things that I want men to connect with, to understand that, yes, there are men out here that I have an amazing group, an amazing network of men who, I've known for years that, if anything were to happen, I know that they've got my back. It could be 4:00 in the morning. I can call any of these men and say, I need you right now. And they would not hesitate. Boom, they'd be there for me. And so it's important for us to have those types of connections and friendships and relationships. And unfortunately, a lot of men don't have those types of connections because we've not allowed ourselves to truly connect and create that type of intimacy with other men. So we need to stop competing. That's my whole point.
Well, I agree. And what I say with people, don't compete, complete. Complete each other, don't compete against each other. Also here, Jason Hodge is saying, huge question. And I don't know what the question was that he was referring to, but he says, huge question. He also says he's part of an authentic manhood group, and it's amazing. He has amazing in all caps. U4Sight is saying the biggest evolution is that black men and women don't like each other. Nothing could be further from the truth, especially on social. And Jason Haas says, exactly. Will you be there for your brother? Those are the relationships to have.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, you know what? We're going to start winding it down because I know you got things to do and we could be on forever.
I got to go hug my wife.
There you go. So any closing comments, and then also how can people get in contact with you?
Well, my closing comment for men specifically is to be optimistic. We aren't the bad guys. Men aren't the problem. The problem is too many of us are trapped in what I'm calling an antiquated paradigm of masculinity. So it's time for us to shift that paradigm. And we shift that paradigm one man at a time by a man gaining the courage to say, I need help, and being willing to seek out that help and know that that's okay. It doesn't make you less of a man. As a matter of fact, it makes you a stronger man. So don't be afraid to say, I need help. Reach out to someone. Create those connections, because that's what it's all about. You about to say something?
Before you go any further, Michael, when you say, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad we can talk about this, you say men aren't the problem. Do you ever get pushback from people when you say men aren't the problem?
Absolutely. Because what do they say? Turn on the TV, and what are you seeing? You're seeing men acting out this way. Well, I don't deny those issues, those challenges that are out there. I mean, sexual assault, rape, these are very real issues. Every man has to be held accountable for their actions. So in no way do I want to deny nor minimize that we have those issues out there. But collectively, it's not the men, although the men who are the ones perpetuating the act, but it's the culture. It isn't until we shift the culture that the men can change. And unfortunately, the men have to change before the culture will change. And that's why you have to start one man at a time having these types of conversations.
Excellent. How can people find out more, get in contact with you, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, for any man who's courageous enough and they really want to jump into this conversation,
I'm gonna stop right there. You have someone who has a question for you in our Get Vocal room saying, don't people create culture?
Absolutely. And that's what I just said. So you've got a culture that needs to be changed. And the only way to change the culture is to change the people in the culture. And that's why I said it begins with one person at a time, because once we change one person and then it catches fire, then the culture changes.
Okay. If Leah wants to follow up on that, I know she will in the next few moments. But I also want to catch up on I will get to that after you finish your contact information.
Well, again, for anybody who's really interested in this conversation, I'll give you a free copy of the book. Just go to newconversationwithmen.com. You don't have to buy the book. I'll give you a free digital copy of the book because I'm so committed to getting this message out. So if you're really into the book, you want to read it, you want to learn more about it, just go to a newconversationwithmen.com and there you'll have access to it.
And I've actually shared the link on the Get Vocal page on the comment sections, and on the replay of this epic conversation, I will share that link also.
And did you do a new conversation with me? Or did you do I see the Coach Michael Taylor product that's gonna sell the book. If they want to get the free copy, just go to a newconversationwithmen.com.
Okay, so you know what? Let me just pull that up right now while we're in the conversation. A new conversation with men. Michael. I like doing things in real time here. Okay, so I'm at a website, knowledge. No, I don't think this is correct. So if you can, what is the URL I should type in?
A newconversationwithmen.com.
New conversation. Okay, so I've just typed it in. Okay, so there you go. So I'm going to type in just on the Get Vocal platform. I'm going to put in the link. Now, when they get to the website, what do they have to do once they get to the website?
All I've got to do is put their name and email address in a little pop-up box there, and they'll get a free digital copy.
Wonderful. So, folks, there you go. Free copy. I'm just going to put in the link right there, A New Conversation with Men. That's how you can get a free copy of this excellent book. He's given his contact information. It is always a pleasure. Let me just shout out people. Let's see. Yes, Jason Hodge. I'm almost sure, Jason Hodge, you'll give your contact information for this book because you just put it in the timeline in my Periscope. Let's see. What I'm going to do. You First Sight is saying we also have to reclaim some of the old affirmations, such as I'm Black and I'm proud and Black is beautiful. Point well taken. So what I'm going to do is just give some shout outs here for the people that were on Periscope. The Jason Hodge, You Foresight, Claude Diamond, Sean Osby. Thank you so much for helping making this conversation epic. Flood the Drummer from Philadelphia. Thank you so much. On the Get Vocal platform, we have Lokesh, who is the tech guru for the Get Vocal platform, who's located in Toronto, just like myself. Leah, thank you so much. Stephen, who's been on since the beginning. We also earlier on had Brad. We had Tony Davis. We've had a few other people jump in. Ryan, of course, who jumped in live. Much appreciated, not taken for granted. Serena Wills, who shared this on Periscope. Thank you so much, everyone, for helping make this an epic conversation. If you want to find out more about me, best thing to do is go to my website, drvibeshow.com. Give you all the social media information, give you all the epic conversations, whether they're via video, which is Get Vocal and or not Periscope, Get Vocal or YouTube, and all the podcasts audio wise. As always, this is how I close out my epic conversations. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, and then finally, aim bigger, aim better, aim wider. Aim higher and aim wider. Next conversation I'm having on the Get Vocal platform is coming up Monday evening. Actually, I think I have two, but I know I have one for sure. With they haven't been back for a while, but we do have them back. We have Beth and Brian talking about. I'll just bring it up here for everybody. Okay, thank you. They're going to be talking about converting religious shame to soulful intimacy. And it's part 3 of 3. That's 7 o'clock Eastern time on Monday. And then on Monday evening, also, Galen Bingham, great sales professional, has over 25 years of sales management experience in companies like Coca-Cola. And he's going to be talking about the 9 steps to become the greatest in the world. So follow me on Get Vocal or follow me on Twitter, and you'll get updates on those epic conversations. As always, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. God bless, peace to you well, keep the faith, and walk good. Thanks for watching live or on the replay, or thanks for listening live or on the replay. Be well.